And I think we're recording now. Hello and welcome. My name is John with Broadsheet.ie. This is the fourth episode of a series of shows we've been doing on the Mother and Baby Home. The Commission of Investigation into the Mother and Baby Homes report is coming out next week, January the 11th, commencing January the 11th. And with me again, I'm delighted to say, is I can't get the name. Eunan Duffy, who's an adoptee and an activist for the mothers and the children, and Breeda Murphy, who is with the Tuam Home Alliance. Good evening, Breeda. Good evening, Eunan. Did I get the name of the alliance right, Breeda? Tuam Mother and Baby.
Tuam Mother and Baby Home Alliance, yeah, John. That's it, yeah.
You're very welcome. And Breeda, if I could just come to you, the report is out next week. Do you know the details of when we'll get it, when you guys will get it, and will you have time to read it before the news breaks?
Yeah. That's the issue, really, John. The report will be out the week commencing the 11th, which is Monday. The Oireachtas return on the 13th, which is Wednesday. And I expect then it will be Thursday or Friday when the report is released. We've been told that we will hear from both the Taoiseach and the Minister, and that the report will be released in advance, but we don't know how much in advance. It may be just 24 hours. And it may be just, a short part, such as conclusions or recommendations or whatever. It'll be something that will allow us to be able to speak on it, hopefully. But the issue from our perspective, and I think really from the perspective of anybody who receives a report, like the Ryan report was well over 2,000 pages as well, it was nearly 3,000 pages, is that the media expect us within moments of receiving the report to be able to give them a very comprehensive answer as to what's there, and we won't have the opportunity to read it and critically examine it. So I think that's rather unfair, because the media are only interested for a very short window of opportunity for us to get involved. Like within 24 hours, it's a news story that's already passed on, and it's so important.
Breeda, a lot of your members are very old, I guess, and the whole process of getting through that 3,000 pages must be in itself.
It's unlikely, yeah, John, sorry to cut across you. It's unlikely that many of our survivors would read it. They would be into their 80s, some of them. And it's a very difficult read. They are already traumatized by giving their evidence and not receiving a copy of that evidence. And the part that will be most interesting, I think, to all of us is certainly the part where their testimonies, real life stories are included, and what weight is given to that versus what weight is given to the responses by the religious. 192,000, over 192,000 mothers and children pass through mother and baby homes and other institutions, county homes, within the period under investigation. There are rumoured, or it's estimated, that there are 57,000 survivors alive at this point. Now, official records tell us that almost 90,000 children were born to unmarried mothers between 1922 and 1973, but that figure is conservative. It's unreliable. There are many more children, we believe, born in that period. Tuam is really, I suppose, the mother and baby home that kicked everything off, and there will be a large focus. But it's important to remember this is replicated right throughout the country, and that is including, the 6 counties in the north where Eunan is. There were approximately 180 such institutions, and what we have is a report that looks at just 14 mother and baby homes and 4 county homes. So it's wonderful that Judge Murphy is involved, because she's pretty familiar with the story, and having done two other investigations into child abuse with clerical child abuse. And Mr. Duncan is involved, Professor Duncan as well. And there's also a professor of history, so he's a professor of law. So it's quite good to have, you know, an overview of all three, and hopefully they will hold both the state and the religious orders to account.
Yeah, Union, are you confident in that regard?
Accountability. I wouldn't think so. You know what I mean? I would be victim survivor, and I suppose we would always have a base point of being extremely cynical and skeptical about all these state commissions and investigations, because so many have turned out to be a complete whitewash and a fudgery of everything that was meant to be investigated in the first place. You know what I mean? And there are so many examples of that there, you know. So in terms of, you know, we know that the terms of reference of all of these state investigations, independent or otherwise, could all be a lot more broader. They could include a lot more institutions. And of course, you know, it's not possible to include every single institution because, you know, so basically all of these investigations are all sampling at the end of the day, you know, but yeah. It's we don't know what their process is of, I suppose, picking the samples and picking the institutions. Here in the north, for example, we're waiting on research commissioned by the government to be published, and the sampling was reduced from all of the, or most of the county homes or workhouses, as they were known, being investigated, and they were eventually reduced to just one, which was the Belfast workhouse. So when you go from 29 to 1 in terms of the workhouses, county homes, it's a significant drop, and we've had all sorts of excuses in terms of what information is available, what records are available. So even the state commission people are seem to be having large difficulties in, I suppose, compliance with the institutions and otherwise who ran all of these different types of institutions. So there are major problems, John, you know what I mean, even from inception and establishment. So it's like everything else, you know, it's a struggle, it's a marathon. It's extremely hard to get these things off the ground and running. But, you know, I suppose the major point of everything, all of these investigations, is what comes after. So we can look at the investigation, we can critically analyse, and then we can say, right, well, how are you going to expedite the reparations, the redress afterwards? And I suppose take into account then, will there be an allowance for additional information to be added? For example, you know, loads of victim survivors are well capable of doing a lot of research. Academics have done a lot of research. Will it be added and will it give weight to what's been already found? Will it substantiate what's already been found, or will it contradict what's already been found? These are all questions that need to be asked, you know.
And the place your mother was, Eunan, is not included in the report, obviously, but it's also not. There's no redress scheme available for you, is there?
No, we're not at that point in the north. Obviously, we had a historical institutional abuse inquiry, and part of the major problem with that was, of course, what's been done previously, even in the south of Ireland, and I suppose in Scotland and England as well, that always the first point of call is child sexual abuse, child institutional abuse for all of those under 18. But the mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries, were excluded from the inquiry in the north, and it's taken up to this point to get some recognised research commissioned by the government, and of course, even though it was handed into the government in August of last year, it's still not been published. So we're not very confident that there's going to be any kind of a statutory independent commission or investigation, a public inquiry, whatever the case may be, into that research, because all of the sound bites and the rhetoric that we've had so far is pointing towards, I suppose, implementing all sorts of state support measures and memorialisation and apologies and all of these sort of things, which are only partial, I suppose, to the full closure of what needs to be done. And the Commission's report in the South will be exactly the same, you know what I mean? They've obviously had the Rand report, and then they've had the Magdalene the women. We've been waiting from 2015 for this report to come out after a number of extensive delays, etc., etc. So, look, it's time's moving on. You know what I mean? It's a cliche. A lot of these people now are very elderly and infirm. Too many have already passed away without seeing any form of justice. So we'll wait and see what happens at the end of the day. So,
Breeda, the Industrial Schools Redress Board spent $1 billion on the board on
yeah, 1.5.
Sorry,
1.5 billion on the redress scheme cost for the industrial abuse survivors, and there were many criticisms of that.
and they got that. I mean, the survivors were given 970 million into, so the redress scheme cost more than the redress.
As usual, I think it's a learning curve, and I wonder, do we ever really learn? Because we've had so many inquiries into various, wrongdoings within Irish society throughout decades. And you really have to wonder who benefits at the end of the day, because from the very moment that this inquiry began, information that was available was sealed. Once an investigation of inquiry or a tribunal is undertaken, they move to the various local authorities to get the records and TUSLA. So the records that previously would have been available, because they would have already satisfied the 30-year rule, are then not available. So that was one of the things I found difficult to understand, was that when it came last year that there was going to be a retention of records bill sealing the Ryan report investigation evidence, sealing that for 75 years. It didn't mention the mother and baby homes because, it wasn't completed at that time. But the reality is that had that gone through Dáil Éireann and passed, it's highly likely that, again, the evidence today that will be available from the mother and baby home investigation, that would have been sealed for 75 years. So right now, people think everything is going to be available because they think it's, the 200,000 that signed their names and that lobbied the ministers and the opposition and did incredible work. At the end of the day, a lot of it is still 60,000 records still being sealed. And, it's one way, I think, of stopping the discourse going forward, because if you haven't got access to the same information that the Commission has had and has made certain findings, and if they return it, as they have done with vaccine trials, for instance, when investigating on the Ryan report, if they return it to the religious orders, it's highly likely that we will never see it again. So, you really wonder who does, at the end of the day, who truly benefits. Is it the victim survivor, or is it the state hand working with either the pharmaceutical companies or the religious orders who, give permission for children to be subjected to various trials? And finding the evidence for all of those is really, really difficult many decades on.
Are you expecting any sort of in-depth details about the vaccine trials? Do you expect to?
I think it's definitely been covered, but how extensive, I don't know. The report runs to 3,000 pages, and I expect, just like the 5th interim report, that there will be extensive appendices with that. I would just hope, as Dennis Naughton often says, that we get access to files that were closed previously, because if they close the off any records that were available prior to the commission setting up in 2015, then you have to say that those have been unavailable for the last 5 years, and they will then be unavailable for the next 30 years. Although, you know, Tune closed in 1961, so one would think they would have been available in 91, or likewise with Shamross Abbey, 1970 closed, so they would have been available in the year 2000. You know, and those are administrative records, but those tell us an awful lot. Those tell us how things happened, why they happened. And, you know, some people want to blame members of society, you know, the families around the country. And there's no doubt that this affects every family in every parish within the country, because family members were nuns, or, you know, they went into the priesthood. So they would have met the women or the children in the course of their work, you know, or they may have been Christian brothers. The women came from our villages, from our homes. The children should have been returned to us. So, you know, there's many families that were forcibly separated, and it is trying to get the information to include them. But thankfully, for DNA at least, and in my own family circumstances, we have people returned to us through DNA. And we are so thrilled to welcome them into our family, because they've been lost for so long.
Yes.
So, you know, you cannot stop technology. The support from government and from the other agencies has to be there to, you know, provide.
On that, Breeda, Roderick O'Gorman, sorry, Breeda, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Roderick O'Gorman, Minister for Children, has said that he's seen the report. It's shocking, but the words he used were that it reflects the misogyny of, well, firstly, it said that all of society are to blame, and it reflects the misogyny of that society, which I think doesn't really bode well in terms of the narrative that they're trying to put across. What I would say is that all society was to blame is a kind of a cop-out. I don't agree with it. I don't believe that was the case.
No, there was a mother, a young mother called Peggy McCarthy in the 1930s, who was about to give birth in Listowel, Tralee area, and she remained at home with her mum and dad. They kept her at home. The community were quite happy with her being at home, and this is, you know, at the height of this in the mid 1930s. And when she came to give birth, she had preeclampsia, so she was quite ill, and she was taken by her next door neighbour, who ran a kind of hackney company. So he took her to the nearest hospital, which was very close to her home. They refused to take her. The nun met them at the door and said, no, she's an unmarried mother. So they sent her to Tralee Hospital, and they again refused to take her. And then she went to the third hospital, and by the time she got there, she was at death's door and died. And her daughter was born and was alive and well. And when it came to her being returned to her community, her family, the church said the canon refused to allow her into the church because she was an unwed mother. So he closed the doors and the gates, but the community rose up, and the community ensured that she got a Christian burial. And even the curate who was there at the time, there's a play written about this. The curate who was there pleaded with the canon to officiate, and while she wasn't taken to the church, she wasn't allowed into the church, she was allowed into the chapel adjoining the hospital. So, and the priest did come to the graveside. Her daughter was reared by her grandparents, by the child's grandparents, Peggy's mum and dad. And Peggy's siblings had all immigrated. She was to remain at home with her mum and dad. And when her grandmother died, she was taken back into the system. And she had a learning disability. And it's just so tragic that her life again was affected despite the community rising up. And, you know, they did make, where they could, and many children, John, most people don't seem to realise, but many children, including in Tuam, grandparents went to Tuam and took the child out. The mother went to England, but the grandparents reared that child as their youngest child. I know of some people here in my own parish who were reared in that way. And, you know, it's a wonderful thing, because they did go against the church and state. Now, they probably did suffer a little for it, but, you know, the community at least supported them, and they never looked down on the child.
No, but I mean, it takes great courage to have done something like that for that family, and for everybody to have followed through. But I mean, the woman died in the end. I can't see how.
She was only 25. She was a young woman. It was her first pregnancy. It seems, you know, I mean, I know we're talking about the mid 1930s, but you can equally say for 1984, when Anne Lovett gave birth. Or there was a lady speaking on Joe Duffy, and she was talking about 1970, when she took up to 20 unmarried mothers over a period of time into her home, and who subsequently gave birth. And she said one of those mothers who preferred to go to Bessborough, and she took her to Bessborough Mother and Baby Home herself, but that mother was 14 years of age. Now, why wasn't that mother driven to the Garda station to you know, be supported, to explain the abuse that must have happened to her? She was a child.
Yeah,
and you know,
really, when the commission was set up as a result of Tuam, many people at the time, in fact, when Tuam story broke, historian Dermot Ferreter said it was the society. I think the political response was pretty much the same, that it was all of us, we all have to look at ourselves and take some responsibility here. And I have to say that I think Roderick Gorman is following that same line again. That, and as you've explained that, I mean, it was kind of impossible, really. I mean, you know, they made a play out of it, because, or they made a John B. Keane, as you say,
that's right, yeah.
Story. I mean, it was so unusual.
It was an achievement. It was something to be celebrated. But I think in relation to ensuring that the survivors, the families of the lost children, and anybody affected now feel included, that we, people like me, like Eunan, like yourself, all of us have a responsibility to ensure the correct narrative, the truth is told, warts and all. You know, it's not as much a blame game. It's about getting closure, or allowing our members who, you know, are elderly, like you said. COVID is very much within our communities at this current time. They're at risk. And I would like to see that redress will follow in the short term, with an interim payment available to them prior to the full payment being made, so that they at least secure an apology from both church and state, but they also, you know, get something more tangible that shows that the state truly is sorry for, you know, having neglected them during their formative years.
Yeah, I just want to say, in terms of the redress, that's possible. I mean, that's within Roderick O'Gorman's gift now to give an interim payment, because they've waited nearly 6 years. The redress, they have to set up this redress board, I guess. That it'll be another year. I mean, if the other redress schemes are anything to go by, there's still a backlog. You know?
Well, they took in Judge Quirk because they saw the errors they'd made with the Ryan report and the industrial school redress scheme there, and, you know, a lot of money going to the legal illegals. So they thought this was a better way of doing it, but they came in for a scathing attack by the Ombudsman in 2017, where they left out 106 women from the Magdalene redress scheme, and 17 of those had worked, slaved in the Magdalene laundry, but they were still in the care of the religious orders. And this was the loophole. But thankfully, the Ombudsman stated that the Department of Justice should make them a ward of court and provide them with the monies that they didn't want to, that the state did not want to give them. But in the interim, while, you know, those 106 women were waiting, some of them died, and there were 35 that at the very least, you know, they walked the same corridors, as they said, to their place of employment every day. They did exactly the same jobs. They were younger than many of the Magdalene women, but you know, they were included. But it came to the point where they were to show evidence of being there. And John, if you were taken into these places because of poverty, and you'd been in a reformatory school or an orphanage, and you were taken across, and Eunan, you should talk about, you know, Newry Home and how everything was cited almost together within the one, like Tuam extended to Bakers, but Tuam did not have a Magdalene laundry attached.
We've got about 7 minutes left, and I just wanted to go to Eunan actually about when we think of the mother and baby homes, we think 1950s, 60s, 30s, 40s, but there's a home that closed in 2006, but it was opened in the 1980s. That is in the report. Could you tell us about that in Donegal?
Yeah, that's right. That's the so-called castle in Newton Cunningham there. That's been included in the commission. So it was established in the very early 80s. And again was a mother and baby institution. Now it didn't hold that many women and girls, but it ran and closed its doors in 2006. So I suppose what we always say, you know, people like ourselves are trying to put across that nearly every sort of modern dispute and issue that we have can be related to these mother and baby institutions. You know what I mean? Well, it comes from symphysiotomy issues to abortion issues, pro-life, and you know the Cure organisation actually referred pregnant women to the castle in Newton Cunningham as a pro-life sort of sympathetic arena where they were going to try and stop pregnant women trying to get across to England or anywhere else to try and have their abortions. So it was a case of, we'll put you into one of these institutions, and when we get you in there, we'll do our very best to put you under as much duress as we possibly can to try and dissuade you from keeping your child and have your child adopted. So, you know, again, this takes away from the historical sort of narrative that people like to talk about when it comes to all of these institutions. You know what I mean? That's a good example in itself, how recently that institution was actually established in the 80s and didn't close until 2006. And I know a lady who was in a hostel in 2001 in Ulsterville Avenue in Belfast, and she went in there as a pregnant woman. And again, she was subjected to the same daily coercion and duress and encouragement all the time. You need to have your child adopted in 2001 in Belfast. So this is very prevalent. You know what I mean? Forced adoptions are still going on now as we speak. Some of these issues have never went away. So even though you can run these institutions on their type back to the 19th century, you know what I mean? These are all ongoing issues. And as I say, we can relate nearly everything that's happening in modern society to what's happened to the mother and baby institutions. You know what I mean? We're still fighting the misogyny. We're still fighting the suppression and the subjugation of women. We're still fighting the total disregard and the dismiss for children and babies, you know what I mean, in this world, and how they're being fostered out, how they're being adopted, how they're being disregarded. Look at the third world countries and the famine that's going on. And it's the women and the children that suffer more than anybody in normal circumstances.
Well, and strangely, I was thinking about when Roderick Gorman said this is about misogyny, and of course it is, but in a funny kind of sort of interesting way, it was the placement of women as this sort of at a special place in society, you know, like a virginal, that, you know, that contrast. It was the deification almost of that idea, you know, Madonna.
It was a special place for women, okay, but it wasn't special in high regard. No, you know, it was special in terms of religious serfdom. I suppose you would put it in. You know what I mean? This is the problem when religion is highly involved this year, because if you even look at the Bible and the way it was constructed, and the way that it deliberately left out, for example, the Gnostic Gospels, the Apocrypha, as we call it, and you know what I mean, the rumours that God himself was supposed to have a wife called Athura, and she's been totally dismissed from the Bibles. You know what I mean? There's all sorts of speculation about Mary Magdalene herself, who obviously gave her name involuntarily to the Mother and Baby institutions and the Magdalene laundries. You know what I mean? There's all sorts of rumours about, and the Bible itself basically made women the way they are. And the likes of the Christian churches, Catholic churches, have subjugated women like that for centuries. And the Catholic Church was no better example in how even the state in the south of Ireland set up its constitution and the whole way that it brought in its principles in and around a woman and her place in the home. And it was all completely attached to the way that the Catholic Church wanted women placed in society. And the state went along with that.
Yeah, that's what I meant really regarding the kind of, it was a special place rather than just treated equally. It was more of a kind of elevated but yet not treated with any sense of equality. Eunan and Breeda, we've run out of time, so I just want to say it's been great to get a kind of an insight into what you guys have been up to in the last few years. When the report comes out, we'll have another show and hopefully go through some of the legal aspects. Can I ask you just finally on the redress? You say there could be up to 55,000 survivors or 50?
Yeah, they've estimated 57,000.
57,000. And would they all be in line for a redress, presumably?
Well, it's like the industrial schools and the Magdalene women. Many of them left to go abroad, to go to the UK. And I know from being over in the UK and London and meeting some, they never wanted to revisit Ireland again for anything. The award was meaningless to them, and they never came forward for it. So I don't know how many will come forward. The government have given these statistics themselves, so they're, fairly accurate. But at the same time, you won't have 57,000 people come forward. You'll only have a fraction of that. And then it's how it's set up. If there's a blame game of, blaming the victim for their own circumstance, it's going to be desperate. It's unacceptable. So I think that we need to be very conscious as to how and who's involved, and an interdepartmental committee will probably come together to draw up the redress, and then there will be a head to that. But we've seen how Caranua has failed. We've seen how adversarial the Ryan report was, where the victims themselves and survivors felt that they were on trial, and ultimately nobody was ever held to account. So, we want to be part and parcel of going forward to ensure that it's a proper scheme, and that our members and people right throughout who are affected and who spent time in those homes get their day to understand and feel like they've been part of the scheme.
Yeah. Sorry, Breeda, we're going to be cut off. Eunan, you just quickly briefly want to say something there?
Yeah, I suppose what we'll have to break here, John, is the institutional denial of wrongdoing. So that means that basically the state and its accomplices in the churches, and we're talking about the Protestant and Catholic churches here, you know what I mean? All of these all need to come together and basically ask the victims and survivors for absolution, if you want to put it in religious terms, and the only way to do that there is to basically give these people what they need in terms of truth, justice, full disclosure, etc., and that includes, I suppose, looking into the burial malpractices, which are extremely important as well.
Yes.
And part of what Breeda's saying about the redress here is dissemination. So any redress must go across to the most popular countries where a lot of people ended up as the diaspora.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eunan and Breeda, and we'll speak to you next week, hopefully with the report in our hands. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you, Breeda.